History is shaped by the things we can see, but it's often changed by the things we never knew existed. World War II was full of hidden missions, secret weapons, quiet mistakes, and daring operations buried deep inside classified files for decades. Today, we unlock 10 of those forgotten secrets, shocking truths that never made it into school textbooks, yet silently shaped the outcome of the deadliest war in human history. If you love discovering the side of history that hides behind the curtain, make sure to subscribe, so you never miss our next journey into the unseen world of wars. Secret 1. The third atomic bomb that was ready by August 1945, while the world was still reeling from the devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A much darker truth waited quietly in the shadows. The United States already had a third atomic bomb fully prepared, assembled piece by piece under the desert sun of New Mexico, ready to be deployed within 10 days if Japan refused to surrender. Few people at the time knew that the plutonium core was completed, the detonator had been tested, and the delivery crew had been assigned their preliminary instructions. This bomb was not a hypothetical weapon on a drawing board, it was a real, physical device, sitting inside a guarded facility, wrapped in secrecy. Military planners believed Japan might endure several atomic strikes before giving up, so internal memos suggested up to 7 bombs could be used by late 1945 and early 1946. Some cities under review for the third strike were Kokura, Niigata, and Nagoya, not Tokyo. Truman's advisors had projected massive U.S. casualties if Japan was invaded directly, and every hour after Nagasaki was spent analyzing Japan's unusual silence. Inside the White House, tension silently grew. Communications from Japan were unclear, the emperor's advisors were divided, and U.S. intelligence feared Japan's military could seize control and reject surrender altogether. At the same time, civilians in Japan were trying to live ordinary lives, walking to markets, gathering water, searching for missing relatives, never knowing their city might be the next to vanish in a sphere of blinding fire. The existence of the third bomb was concealed for decades, buried under layers of classified documents, partially because the United States wanted to minimize the perception that atomic warfare was becoming a routine tool. Historians later discovered that the third bomb's core, nicknamed the August Core, was dangerously close to being shipped out. Japan's sudden surrender on August 15 was not inevitable. It was a desperate decision made under confusion, miscommunication, and fear. Had the Japanese government hesitated just a bit longer, or had internal political factions delayed the surrender message, the world would have witnessed a third atomic detonation and explosion that would have reshaped not just Japan's cities, but global politics, moral philosophy, and the entire future of nuclear warfare. Secret 2. The Ghost Army, America's invisible battlefield trick during World War II. As real Allied divisions fought across France and Germany, a completely different kind of unit operated in the background, one armed not with rifles or tanks, but with paintbrushes, giant rubber inflatable vehicles, loudspeakers, and a mastery of illusion. The U.S. Army's Ghost Army, officially the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, was a secret deception force unlike anything seen before. Made up of artists, designers, sound engineers, and set builders from places like Hollywood and New York art schools. Their mission was simple yet extraordinarily dangerous: to impersonate real Allied units and trick German intelligence into believing massive armored forces were assembling where only a handful of men actually stood. They used life-sized inflatable tanks that looked real from the air, fake artillery made of wood, dummy airfields, phony radio networks that mimicked communications patterns of real divisions, and enormous loudspeakers that blasted recorded tank noises and troop movements up to 25 kilometers away. German reconnaissance planes routinely photographed these armies, unaware they were made of air and canvas. The Ghost Army's work was so effective that German units sometimes rerouted thousands of troops to respond to an Allied invasion force that did not exist. Their operations helped reposition enemy defenses before major Allied offensives, saving thousands of lives that would have been lost in direct fighting. Yet the men of the Ghost Army operated with no personal weapons, meaning if they were discovered, they would be executed as spies. Despite their extraordinary achievements, their existence remained classified for nearly 50 years. Even families of the soldiers had no idea what their sons had truly done during the war. The secrecy persisted because deception techniques were still considered militarily valuable long after 1945. When the files were finally released in the 1990s, historians were stunned to learn just how many major battles were shaped by inflatable tanks and theatrical illusions. The Ghost Army demonstrated that sometimes wars are not won only by firepower, but by creativity, imagination, and the ability to shape what the enemy believes. Their story remains one of the most astonishing and least known secrets of World War II. Secret 3. Britain cracked Enigma far earlier than the world knew. While World War II is often described as a clash of armies, weapons, and ideology, one of its most decisive battles was fought quietly in a countryside mansion in England far from the front lines where mathematicians, linguists, puzzle solvers, and young clerks worked day and night to crack the German Enigma cipher. Public memory often simplifies the story, saying the Allies cracked Enigma, but the truth is far more extraordinary. The British were reading up to 90% of German encrypted messages early in the war, long before Germany suspected anything. Inside Bletchley Park, tens of thousands of intercepted messages arrived daily, each carrying valuable information about troop movements, supply shipments, submarine positions, and high-level strategies. Alan Turing and his colleagues engineered electromechanical bombs that could test possible Enigma key combinations at unprecedented speed. British intelligence gave this ultra-secret achievement the codename ULTRA, and only a tiny group of leaders was allowed to know it existed. If the Germans ever suspected that the cipher was compromised, the entire advantage would collapse instantly. To hide their capability, the Allies sometimes allowed convoys to be attacked or towns to be bombed because reacting to every intercepted message would reveal the secret. This moral burden weighed heavily on the intelligence officers responsible. The advantage Ultra gave was immense. Allied naval commanders could redirect convoys away from waiting U-boats, saving countless ships. Generals could anticipate enemy offensives and deploy troops accordingly, and air forces could strike depots and bases precisely when the Germans least expected it. Meanwhile, German commanders remained convinced that their encryption machines were unbreakable. They trusted Enigma blindly, believing its constantly changing keys made it impenetrable. They never imagined that young women in a quiet mansion, typing at wooden desks, were deciphering their most sensitive strategies. Ultra shortened the war by an estimated 2 years, prevented the Atlantic supply route from collapsing, and perhaps most importantly, never lost its secrecy during the conflict. Even after the war ended, Britain did not reveal the truth because it intended to sell captured German encryption machines to other countries, quietly reading their communications as well. Only in the 1970s did the world finally learn the full depth of the Enigma breakthrough, revealing that one of the most critical turning points of World War II was a battle not of tanks or guns, but of logical thinking and silent persistence. Secret 4. Japan's silent fire balloon attack on the United States in the closing years of World War II. Japan launched one of the strangest and least known weapons ever used in warfare, an intercontinental balloon bomb designed to ride the jet stream across the Pacific and strike the United States. These devices, called Fugo fire balloons, were constructed from layers of rice paper glued together with paste made from plant fibers and seaweed. The balloons were filled with hydrogen, equipped with timers, altitude-controlled devices, and incendiary payloads. Japan released more than 9,300 balloons, hoping they would drift over North America, fall into forests, and ignite large-scale fires that would cause panic, disrupt industry, and force the U.S. to divert troops away from the Pacific front. The science behind the project was surprisingly advanced. Japanese meteorologists were among the first to study and map the Pacific jet stream, discovering that high-altitude winds could carry objects thousands of miles in a matter of days. Although most of the balloons fell into the ocean or landed harmlessly in remote areas, nearly 300 reached North America, with sightings and recoveries reported in Oregon, Montana, Washington, British Columbia, and even as far as Michigan. The U.S. government ordered a complete news blackout to prevent panic and avoid giving Japan feedback about where the balloons landed. Because of this silence, Japan believed the project was failing and eventually abandoned it. Tragically, one balloon caused the only wartime American fatalities outside of Pearl Harbor. In May 1945, a group of children and a pregnant woman in Oregon found a strange object in the forest, unaware it was a bomb. When it detonated, it killed 6 people. For decades afterward, most Americans never heard of the balloon attacks because the operation remained classified, overshadowed by larger wartime events. It wasn't until long after the war that declassified documents revealed how serious the U.S. government considered the threat. If the balloons had sparked wildfires during a dry season or landed near critical infrastructure, they could have caused significant damage. Though ultimately unsuccessful, the Fugo campaign remains a remarkable example of wartime innovation and a chilling reminder of how far nations will go, even with limited resources, when desperation and creativity collide. Secret 5. Operation Mincemeat, the dead body that changed the war among the many deception operations carried out during World War II. None is more incredible or more unlikely to succeed than Operation Mincemeat, a British plan that used a dead body to feed false intelligence to Nazi Germany. In early 1943, as the Allies prepared to invade southern Europe, German leaders were desperate to know where the next attack would come from. The British saw an opportunity. They obtained the body of a deceased homeless man, dressed him in the uniform of a Royal Marine officer, and created a fictional identity named Major William Martin. They filled his pockets with love letters, receipts, photographs, bus tickets, and personal items to make him appear real. Most importantly, they placed fake top-secret documents in a briefcase chained to his wrist, containing fabricated plans suggesting that the Allies would invade Greece and Sardinia instead of Sicily. British submariners carefully released the body to the Spanish coast, knowing that Spain, though officially neutral, was infiltrated by German intelligence agents who passed everything they found to Berlin. As planned, the body washed ashore and Spanish officials turned the documents over to the Germans. High-ranking Nazi strategists studied every page, convinced they had uncovered a major Allied secret. Hitler himself believed the deception completely and ordered reinforcements away from Sicily, weakening German defenses in the one place the Allies actually intended to attack. When the real invasion of Sicily began on July 10, 1943, German forces were caught unprepared, enabling the Allies to land with fewer casualties and gain a strategic foothold in southern Europe. The operation was so successful that even after the war, some German officers insisted that the documents had been genuine. For decades, the true story remained hidden behind secrecy laws, partly because intelligence agencies wanted to preserve similar techniques for future use. When the files were eventually declassified, historians realized how close the operation had come to failing. Weather conditions, ocean currents, and political uncertainties could have easily ruined the entire plan. Yet everything aligned with almost cinematic precision. Operation Mincemeat remains one of the most daring, imaginative, and improbable acts of wartime deception ever attempted, proving that sometimes a single false clue can alter the direction of a global conflict. Secret 6. Hitler's dependency on 70-plus drugs. Adolf Hitler is often portrayed as a dictator fueled by ideology, rage, and paranoia, but another less discussed factor shaped his decisions during the final years of World War II. A heavy dependency on a cocktail of more than 70 different drugs administered by his personal physician, Dr. Theodor Morell. These substances ranged from harmless vitamins to dangerous stimulants and narcotics, including methamphetamine tablets, cocaine eye drops, opioid painkillers, barbiturates, testosterone derivatives, and experimental hormone injections. Morrell believed in aggressive, unconventional treatments, often injecting Hitler multiple times per day with mixtures he called miracle tonics. Hitler, who suffered from chronic stomach problems, insomnia, tremors, and anxiety, grew increasingly reliant on these injections for energy and focus. By 1943, his drug regimen had escalated dramatically. Records show that before major meetings and speeches, Morrell administered Pervitin, a potent form of methamphetamine, giving Hitler bursts of energy, followed by periods of irritability, aggression, and unstable mood swings. Cocaine drops were used to treat sinus infections and throat irritation, but in practice, they contributed to psychological dependency. As the war turned against Germany, Hitler's physical and mental health deteriorated, worsened by constant stimulant abuse. Observers reported that he became increasingly paranoid, impulsive, and prone to delusional thinking, particularly during the chaotic final months in the Berlin bunker. While it would be simplistic to attribute Germany's military mistakes solely to his drug use, historians now recognize that his declining health and chemical dependency influenced key decisions, such as refusing tactical withdrawals, issuing unrealistic no-retreat orders, and insisting on offensives detached from logistical reality. Morrell's notes, recovered after the war, shocked medical experts, revealing the extent of the injections and the lack of medical supervision. Hitler's inner circle distrusted Morrell, believing he was poisoning the Führer, yet Hitler refused to dismiss him, claiming Morrell was the only doctor who provided relief. As Germany collapsed, Hitler's access to medications dwindled, worsening his instability. Morrell fled the bunker shortly before Hitler's suicide and died in obscurity in 1948. For decades, Hitler's drug dependency remained a little-known detail, overshadowed by larger wartime narratives. Today, it stands as a chilling reminder that the leader of a global conflict, one whose decisions impacted millions, was physically fragile, psychologically disturbed, and chemically dependent during the most critical moments of the war. Secret 7. The German map error that changed the Eastern Front. In the vast, unforgiving landscapes of the Eastern Front, where distance and weather were as deadly as bullets and artillery, a single navigational mistake can alter the trajectory of a campaign. One of the least discussed but most consequential moments occurred when German troops advancing toward the Soviet Union's critical oil fields made a map-reading error that redirected entire divisions in the wrong direction. This incident took place during Operation Edelweiss, the 1942 German push toward the oil-rich Caucasus. Hitler believed capturing these fields would cripple the Soviet war machine, depriving it of fuel for tanks, aircraft, and industry. German planners relied heavily on detailed maps, but many were outdated or incomplete, especially in remote Soviet regions. As the army advanced deeper into unfamiliar terrain, logistical strain mounted. Supply lines were stretched, communication wires broke, and field commanders relied on hastily drawn maps or vague directions. At one key junction, a misplaced arrow and misinterpreted landmark caused a major German force to turn west instead of south, sending them toward an irrelevant mountain pass rather than the vital oil centers. The error wasted several crucial days, during which Soviet reinforcements fortified defensive positions and sabotaged oil infrastructure to prevent German capture. Historians describe the delay as a seemingly minor mistake with enormous consequences. It contributed to the broader failure of the Caucasus offensive and stretched German forces thin, leaving them unable to support the simultaneous assault on Stalingrad. Several German commanders recognized the error too late and were forced to redirect exhausted troops who had already marched dozens of unnecessary kilometers. Fuel shortages worsened, and vehicles broke down in the mountainous terrain. Meanwhile, Soviet forces used the precious time to regroup, evacuate civilians, and prepare fortified lines. The failure to seize the Caucasus oil fields reshaped the war's direction. Without fuel, the German war machine faltered, and strategic mobility collapsed in the years that followed. While many factors led to Germany's defeat on the Eastern Front, this navigational blunder stands out because of its simplicity and avoidability. It illustrates how even a technologically advanced army can falter when operating in vast, hostile environments where maps are unreliable, communication is fragile, and every decision carries immense weight. This forgotten mistake became one of the many quiet turning points that ultimately denied Germany the resources it desperately needed to continue the war. Secret 8. Soviet wooden tanks that fooled the Luftwaffe during World War II. The Soviet Union faced immense pressure to protect its industrial centers, supply depots, and troop concentrations from German reconnaissance aircraft. With limited resources and factories under constant threat, Soviet strategists adopted a surprisingly simple yet genius tactic: constructing entire armies out of wood. These wooden tanks, artillery pieces, trucks, and even fake aircraft were built by carpenters, theater designers, and ordinary workers who had no previous connection to the military. Painted carefully and arranged with realistic spacing, these wooden decoys looked authentic from the air. German reconnaissance pilots flying at high altitudes and often under pressure recorded the positions of these Soviet armored divisions, unaware they were looking at forests filled with plywood and logs shaped into military silhouettes. The Luftwaffe redirected valuable bombs and artillery fire toward these decoy installations, wasting resources that could have devastated actual Soviet units. The deception was so convincing that in some cases, German pilots proudly reported destroying dozens of tanks that never existed. Soviets even built fake fuel depots with painted shadows and simulated tire tracks to enhance realism. To increase the illusion, workers created smoke fires near dummy factories to mimic heavy industrial production, drawing German bombers away from actual manufacturing sites deeper inside the country. Soviet commanders also repositioned real units immediately after German reconnaissance flights, ensuring that the Luftwaffe attacked empty spaces or wooden mock-ups. In some regions, more decoy equipment existed than real equipment. These wooden armies became especially valuable during the German push toward Moscow and Stalingrad, when diverting even a few bombing raids away from supply lines saved countless lives. The Germans never fully realized how many resources they wasted on these illusions, partly because Soviet deception methods were extremely well coordinated and adapted rapidly to changing conditions. After the war, Soviet veterans recounted how they watched German aircraft repeatedly bomb the same wooden tank fields, unaware of the trick. The operation revealed something important about warfare: that technology and firepower, not always the deciding factors sometimes, creativity and resourcefulness can shift the momentum of a conflict. These wooden decoys became a symbol of Soviet resilience, demonstrating how a nation under immense hardship could outsmart a formidable enemy using nothing more than carpentry, paint, and ingenuity. Though rarely mentioned in standard histories, the wooden armies played a significant role in preserving Soviet industrial capacity and slowing the German advance, making them one of the most remarkable examples of deception in modern warfare. Secret 9. Japan's early stealth submarine experiments. Decades before stealth aircraft became a technological reality, Japan quietly experimented with early forms of radar-absorbing coatings on several submarine classes during World War II. While Japan is often remembered for its aircraft carriers and kamikaze tactics, its naval laboratories were also working on innovations intended to counter Allied radar, which was becoming increasingly effective at detecting surface ships and low-surface submarines. Japanese engineers realized that standard submarine hulls reflected radar waves strongly, making them easier to track during nighttime patrols. To reduce detection, some submarines were coated with a mixture of rubber, carbon, and tar-based compounds intended to scatter or absorb radar signals. These materials were applied manually, layer by layer, in naval shipyards, producing a distinctive matte black finish unlike typical naval paint. Though primitive compared to modern stealth technology, the coatings had measurable effects. Allied radar operators occasionally reported fading signals or submarines that briefly disappeared from screens during tests and encounters. Japan also experimented with conning tower shapes designed to reduce radar reflection angles, as well as hull modifications that decreased the submarine's acoustic signature. These innovations emerged partly because Japan relied heavily on submarine scouting for long-range reconnaissance missions against Allied fleets. In some cases, stealth-coated submarines were assigned to shadow U.S. carrier groups without engaging, sending detailed movement reports back to command. Allied forces did not understand these radar anomalies at the time and attributed them to equipment malfunction or weather interference. Only after the war did captured documents reveal the surprising truth. Japan had been experimenting with stealth principles long before the concept became central to Cold War technology. While the coatings were far from perfect, they degraded quickly in salt water and required frequent reapplication. They represented a remarkable leap in naval innovation during a time when Japan was suffering from severe material shortages. Ironically, these early stealth modifications did not significantly alter the war's outcome, as Japan's shrinking naval infrastructure struggled to maintain operations. However, they demonstrated the creativity and adaptability of Japanese engineers, who sought every possible advantage against the increasingly powerful Allied detection systems. Today, these early stealth experiments are considered precursors to modern radar-absorbing materials used in advanced submarines and aircraft, highlighting a forgotten chapter of wartime innovation. Secret 10. Britain's Iceberg Aircraft Carrier Project. One of the strangest and most ambitious secret projects of World War II was Britain's attempt to build an enormous aircraft carrier out of ice, known as Project Habakkuk. The plane emerged during a crisis early in the war, when German U-boats were sinking Allied supply ships faster than they could be replaced. With steel in short supply and shipyards overwhelmed, British scientists proposed an unconventional idea: construct a floating airbase from a mixture of ice and wood pulp called pykrete, a substance far stronger and slower to melt than normal ice. The concept was simple but stunning: an aircraft carrier the size of a small town, capable of operating in the North Atlantic, resistant to torpedoes, and cheap to produce in massive quantities. In 1943, engineers built a prototype on a frozen lake in Canada to test the material's feasibility. Astonishingly, the structure survived gunfire, resisted explosives, and took months to melt even in warm temperatures. The British envisioned building full-scale versions, more than 2,000 feet long, with walls 40 feet thick, carrying dozens of bomber aircraft capable of hunting German submarines across the open ocean. Winston Churchill supported the idea enthusiastically, believing it could solve the Atlantic convoy crisis. However, as research progressed, logistical challenges mounted rapidly. The enormous ships would require refrigeration systems running continuously to prevent melting, specialized construction bases in remote cold regions, and massive amounts of manpower at a time when Allied forces were already stretched thin. Costs soared far beyond initial expectations, and steel production began increasing thanks to American industrial output, reducing the desperate need for such an unconventional solution. By late 1943, improvements in long-range aircraft and escort carriers diminished the project's strategic value, and Project Habakkuk was quietly abandoned. The prototype melted completely by the following summer. For decades, the entire project remained obscure, mentioned only in classified reports and technical notes that seemed too bizarre to be taken seriously. When the files were finally released, the world discovered that Britain had seriously considered building mountains of ice to defeat German submarines. Though impractical in the long term, Project Habakkuk demonstrated the extraordinary creativity, desperation, and engineering imagination that wartime pressure can produce. It remains one of the most unusual and audacious secret weapons concepts in modern military history. These secrets remind us that behind every headline battle, there were hidden decisions, quiet heroes, and overlooked moments that changed the world forever. If this story opened a new window into World War II for you, then hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and share this video with someone who loves history as much as you do. This is History of Wars. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter of the past.